Merry Christmas, everyone. Still going. It's a great day. Anybody watch the Chiefs on Sunday? Don't. Oh, I know you did. You don't even have to lie to me. We all watch the Chiefs, and it's okay. If you didn't, you're lying. But anyway, if you watch the Chiefs on Sunday, you watched them lock up their number one seed. All right, got themselves another number one seed. First round bye. It's very important for the franchise there. Again, can't say that any of us are surprised. We all know Pat. Pat's not going to lose. So Pat Mahomes, gotta love that kid. But then predictably, and that's again Chiefs, great. But predictably, once they won, all of the players, all of the commentators, all the headlines started saying the exact same thing because they were just waiting to say it. Right? The AFC goes through Arrowhead. Right? They love saying that. AFC goes through Arrowhead. What does that mean if you're not a football junkie? Well, since the Chiefs got the first round bye, they also have home field advantage. So if you want to go to the Super Bowl this year and from the AFC, at some point someone has to win in Arrowhead. So that's just, again, the AFC now goes through Arrowhead. If you want the AFC championship, if you want to get to the Super Bowl, you have to win at Arrowhead Stadium. The AFC goes through Arrowhead. Right? Right. Okay. Anyway, and while we all love football, and we can all appreciate that, at the end of the day, football doesn't really matter. I said it. You can drive me out of town later. But we all know that football doesn't actually matter, right? Like, we know that, right? Like, this means yes? Okay. Okay. Football actually doesn't matter. It doesn't actually. But what does matter though, is humanity, is salvation. It's the eternal salvation of every man, woman, and child. That matters, which is good news because that also means that you matter. Not just Pat, but also you. You matter. This is great news. And as John Paul II would point out, just like the AFC goes through Arrowhead, he didn't actually say that, but just as the AFC goes through Arrowhead, as John Paul II would say, the history of mankind, the history of salvation, that goes through the family. The history of mankind, the history of salvation itself goes through the family. He continued that by saying the family is placed at the center of that great struggle between good and evil, between life and death, between love and all that is opposed to love. And then he finished this banger off by saying this: as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the entire world in which we live. What's he getting at? Okay, what he's getting at is we all look around and we can all see that there's a lot of problems in the world, right? Easy peasy, China, Ukraine, Middle East, abortion, poverty, immigration, like you name it. We can list off so many issues. The news literally exists to tell us all of the issues and all the problems. That's how they make their money. There's so many problems, and everyone agrees on that. There's always problems, so many problems. But then do we also agree with John Paul II when he says that, well, if we want to address these problems, sure, there's a lot of things that need to be done. But the fundamental thing that we need to do, if we want to solve the world's problems, do we also agree with John Paul II that the place to begin is the family? Right? That's what John Paul II is getting at. It's very easy for us to get caught up in the world's problems, but John Paul II says, well, if you want to address those, just begin with your family. Why? Because the history of humankind, the history of salvation, it goes through the family. This is what he's getting at, right? As the family goes, so goes the nation, so goes the entire world. And if you don't agree with John Paul II, okay, that's pretty bold of you. But also, we all like Mother Teresa, right? Everyone loves Mother Teresa. Can't not like Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa said, if you want to change the world, then go home and love your family. Again, she's on the exact same page as John Paul II. So today as we celebrate the feast day of the Holy Family, the family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the simple challenge for us is the simple challenge that we're presented with is do you, do we actually get on board with that idea that the most important, the most world-changing force in the world is just that, is a strong and healthy marriage and family? Do we actually believe that? All right, I've talked to you way too much about my family, but it's the one family I got, sorry. All right, but like my family, my parents, we grew up very much right in the smack in the middle of the John Paul II era. Like for most of my life, for all of my life growing up, I didn't know that there was another thing as a pope. Like I didn't know popes could die. I didn't know you could get a new one. Like John Paul II was the pope. Yeah, it was him. And my parents, again, we grew up smack in the middle of the John Paul II era. And so they very much knew what he was talking about, and then very much they got on board with it. I told you before, we were such nerds that we had a family motto, and it was in Latin. Right? Our family motto was Vita Familia, family life, which means when my parents were trying to make decisions in life, it was never, is this going to advance my career? Is this going to advance this or that or the other? The question was always, is this going to support our family and our family life? And it wasn't just like this selfish, our family against the world sort of a thing. It was very much our family life centered on the faith. Right? Is this going to support our family and the faith at the center of our family? That was the family motto. And that was the tone that was set very much so by my parents. My parents were the ones that set that tone, and they were the only ones that could set that tone. I've told you that before. Study after study, survey after survey shows the most important thing in the life of your children, in the life of any child, is their parents, especially when it comes to passing on and handing on the faith. You could have the most amazing pastor in the world, which I know isn't me, but you could have John Paul II. John Paul II could be the priest here. That'd be awesome, way better than what you got currently. But guess what? Survey shows, yeah, that's about like 1% of the equation. It's really not that important. It's always very humbling for me to hear those stats. I'm just like, oh, darn it. I don't matter. No, who matters the most? It's mom and dad. Right? And that's what my parents took very, very seriously. They knew that they had to be the ones to set the tone in the family if they wanted to pass on the faith to their family. I've given you a lot of examples of what that looks like, and I could spend hours talking about all the very intentional things that they did for our family. But my favorite one to talk about is just how we live Sunday. Right? The way that our family lived Sunday growing up, I came to find out was pretty radical. Apparently, a lot of people did not do what our family did. Growing up, guess how many Chiefs games I watched growing up? I watched one. It was one. It helped that it was the Trent Green era, so there was nothing to watch anyway. But we didn't watch football on Sundays. We just didn't. Right? We grew up, as I've told you before, we grew up as Notre Dame football fans. Why? Because they played on Saturday, and they were on TV. Right? So that's why, but we watch football on Saturdays because Sundays were centered on the Mass as a family. Then we come home and eat together as a family, hang out during the day as a family, eat together as a family, again, pray together as a family. Sundays were very much set apart, and our entire week, our entire family life was anchored around how we lived and how we celebrated Sunday. But again, because of that decision my parents made and so many others, placing the faith at the center of our family, that's how the faith was handed on to me and to my siblings. It was not an accident. It was very much that tone set by my parents. Why? Because they agreed with John Paul II. They knew that if they wanted to do something great in the world, it wasn't going to be go get a really cool job and maybe I can become a super influential person and change the world. They knew the most important, most influential thing that I could do is to raise this family centered on Jesus Christ. That's the most world-changing force in the world that I could contribute to right here, right now. Again, they agreed with that. The question then, again, for us is, do we agree with that? And then do we live it out? Do we put it into practice? Again, I've told you this before. If I gave you the test, you would all say, I agree, Father, 100%, I'm on board. But then it comes back to, but then do I live it? And again, you're all perfect here. We're all perfect here, don't worry. I have to worry about my people in Bushton and Little River. They're my problem children. You're perfect. But survey says, not all y'all, but survey says, do we live that out? No, we don't. If you look at somebody's life, again, never listen to what someone says. Always look at what they do. If you look at someone's life, you see how we set up our lives. The priorities in our life go, ready? Not your life, Little River and Bushton, my problem children. You're perfect. Our priorities go work. Or if you're in school, it goes school, right? That's always the number one thing. These are all good things, by the way. You need a job, I get that. Work's not a bad thing. But we always say work goes first. Why? Well, because I got to take care of my kids, Father, so I need work. I got to work. Again, we justify things in a lot of ways. Work comes first. The second thing is kids. Duh, why am I working? Because I got to take care of those kids, Father. Kids are the second most important thing. And so our kids then become the most important thing after work, duh. But what does that look like? Well, I've got to go to all their events. And they have 18 more events tonight. And I signed them up for 12 more events next week. And I got to go there and there and there. Right, so our kids then become the second most important thing. Third on the list then is our marriage. We're like, well, if I have time, then I'll get to my marriage. I'll get to that. Do you know how I know that? Again, don't answer out loud. When was the last time you went on a date night with your spouse? And is the excuse you're about to give me, well, we've been very busy, Father. And I say, why are you busy? And you say, well, my kids. Oh, okay, there we go. Right? Do we place our kids above our marriage? And then, of course, not y'all, but my people, then we put God on the list. I got to make sure I get to Mass. I'll make sure I'll pray a little bit each day. Then we'll get there. That's what it looks like typically for most people, not y'all. But for most people, that's the order we put things in. Again, just call it how you see it. But then we have to then ask, but if I want to raise and to have a family that, as John Paul II, as Mother Teresa pointed out, that can be that life, that world-changing force in the world. If the history of the world truly does pass through the family, if salvation passes through the family, well then what does John Paul II and what do Mother Teresa also point out? What does our faith point out? Well, they say actually the order of that should be reversed. It should go God, then your marriage, then your kids, and then work. What does that look like? Again, just think. The easiest way for me to think is my calendar, right? Look at your calendar. What if God was the first thing on your calendar? It would mean that all of a sudden, we would all have plenty of time to pray each day. We all make time for work right now. We all make time for kids. But what would it look like if God was first? Well, then all of a sudden, we'd have plenty of time to pray. We'd have plenty of time for God each day. One of my favorite things that would happen, it would be this. People would stop confessing, Father, I didn't pray. And people would start saying, Father, I forgot to pick up my kids 3 times this week. What? Why? Because I was praying. I was praying too much and I forgot to pick up my kids. No one's ever confessed that, by the way, but maybe one day you'll be the first. You'll be a saint. Right? No, we all go, Father, I didn't have time to pray. Why? Because I had to go get my kids, because this happened with my kids, because this happened at work, this. Again, we just call it how we see it. All of a sudden, if God was first, we'd have plenty of time for prayer. If God was first, all of a sudden, we'd have plenty of time and we'd make sure that Sunday Mass was at the center of our week instead of, I just need to make sure I check that box off this week. All of a sudden, our day would be, and our week would be centered around Sunday and the Sunday Mass and how we live out Sunday. Again, many, many ways that would look like. But again, think, what would it look like if God was actually the first priority? Then the second thing, and this is very challenging, what if my marriage then took the second most important place? We don't like how this sounds because it sounds selfish. It sounds like, but Father, my kids, I have to take care of them. I know. No one's saying don't take care of your kids. But what if your marriage took second place? God, then your marriage. What would it look like, right, if you made sure to prioritize the missus, made sure to prioritize the mister in the house before everything else? What would that actually look like? Because again, survey after survey, study after study shows, if you want to do something great for your kids, what's the most important thing you could do for them? Your marriage, right? That's what survey after survey shows. It's easy to think, well, I want to support my kids, so I'm going to sign them up for 7 more things and drive them to those things. That's me supporting and loving my children. But actually, a more important thing you could do is focus on that most important relationship that you have. And again, I know many of you come from families where your parents were divorced. You may have been divorced yourself. And so I'm not trying to be callous or harsh to that. I know there are as many stories to your life, to everyone's life here, as there are pages in a book. Like, there are plenty. I'm not trying to simplify this and oversimplify it. I know very much that I'm pointing out an ideal sort of a situation. But yet, even if you are in that situation, even more so does God have to come first for any of this to work. But this is how God sets it up. God has to be first. That marriage has to be second. And then you'll make sure that you take care of your kids. You'll make sure you go to work. I'm not worried about that. That's kind of more natural to us. But that's the question for reflection. Again, what would it look like if I was actually on board with what John Paul II says? That the most important thing to change the world actually is just my family. It's my marriage and is my family. Do I actually believe that? Do we believe, again, do we believe that strong families come from being your child's taxi service? Or do we believe that strong families that could change the world come from building that culture within your family, centered on God, centered on the faith, centered on your marriage and your children? Do we actually believe that? The reason that the Chiefs have such a winning culture, the reason that the AFC goes through Arrowhead is why? The Chiefs' culture is something you can't mess with. Right? They've just built that up to a point where it's just very difficult. But then it's the same thing with the family. Right? If we build up a culture within our families, that's something also that's hard to beat. Very difficult. And it's also something that can continue to change the world. So today, as we celebrate this feast day of the Holy Family, that's what, right, this little family helps us to recognize. Right? Jesus shows us. He didn't show up 35 years old, ready to go with a crown on his head. Jesus shows up where? In and through a family. Just a small, humble little family. That's how Jesus decided to change the world. And then he asks us to do the same thing. To recognize that the most important, the most powerful force, as John Paul II, as Mother Teresa point out, something that can truly change the world, isn't a perfect family, but it is a holy family.